Okay, so this piece is titled Everything We See is Never Enough. The work is comprised of plastic straws, metallic twist ties, plastic and paper twist ties, yarn, vinyl tape. It measures 14 by 12 by 12 feet, and it's from 2010. This piece was the initial exposition and exploration of my response to the sheer accumulation of objects and materials in my life. It's a sinister acknowledgement to the way that we as a culture define, rank, and assign categories to objects and materials that which we surround ourselves. This is a detail of the previous image. The staging of reversals is a recurring theme in my work. By utilizing synthetic materials and employing their physical characteristics with a reference to organic products, reversals are staged between the synthetic and organic. This work is driven by materials that we collectively project upon, define, and rank according to value and utility. This piece is from 2013. It's called The Anatomy of the Palace of Wisdom. It is comprised of aluminum tape, insulated electrical wire, HVAC wire, Category 5 wiring, bare copper wiring, stir straws, jumbo straws, plastic metallic twist ties. This piece was assembled in modular forms off-site, transported to the gallery, and then assembled on-site. I had a lot of rough ideas that were expressed two-dimensionally prior to the installation. And a common theme running through my work is the utilization of seemingly mundane materials. The use of lightweight disposable materials in the objects that I make is a staging of reversals attempting to make priceless art with worthless material. I know. Since the piece was produced in modules, you can kind of begin to see where the categorically different networks are almost trying to pull away from one another and become more singularized. This work also began to actually embrace the idea of a platform, a plinth, or a pedestal. And I used that as a tool to separate the work from the surrounding architecture. It functions, it validates it as it being like an other object. And it, at that time, it was becoming more clear that I wanted to kind of like singularize my work and clarify my ideas. And you can also see where there's kind of some slight associations with, organic imagery associated with geometric forms as well. This really marked the end of kind of this phase of my work where I was creating these like almost atmospheric installations that were very time sensitive and labor intensive, and they were all built on site. As some of you may not know, I am a working full-time electrician. Knowing this, you can see how linear elements have played a role in my art making, along with color coding and overlapping network integrations. This piece is an initial departure from the sprawling site-specific installation, and it actually is an indication toward a singularized approach to the objects that I create. In this work, the materials that I employ are culturally debased, but through a process of transformation, the object becomes elevated to a functioning position parallel to valuable commodities and fine art. It's a sardonic response to the notion of the priceless object. Again, you can see the paralleling duality of the synthetic and organic, utilizing man-made material and indicating physical attributions of living organisms. The work functions to embrace our understanding of the omnipresence of networked systems that actually exist on the micro and macro level. These interconnected systems exist in our environment and create an infrastructure that we depend on for survival. In the same way that interconnected networks exist within our bodies, creating systems that we rely on, such as our neural networks and cardiovascular systems. Employing insipid images and materials that are collectively charged with social signifiers and class identity, the work in general is a sinister response to a cultural drive to categorically rank material and organize our surroundings. We infuse our machines and structures with a hierarchical system of order. This piece actually marked another breakaway point in my work, acknowledging my work's growing dependence to separate itself and singularize the elements. Utilizing geometric figures and grid formations, that became a tool to segregate organic formations previously found in my sprawling installations. This piece is called It's All Around You. It's made of category 5 conductors, which are actually used for networking and internet cables. And they're actually mounted on die-bond panels. They measure 7 inches each, so that gives you some relative size of scale. Although this work insists on formal purity, it never remains solely dependent upon the materials and imagery employed. Reversals are staged between banality and beauty, synthetic and organic, repulsion and attraction. By attempting to hold a mirror up for the public to see themselves, I reveal my own proclivities. As a commercial and industrial electrician, metallic conduit is a paramount material utilized for an obvious physical characteristics. So when I began to entertain the possibility of using this material for art, I was very apprehensive. I felt like the material would not only be overly boring, but somewhat debased due to its strong association with class identity. But then once I really thought about that, then I thought it would probably be the perfect material to use. So one of these pieces is actually downstairs in the lobby. Each of the bare conduit works range from 60 to 90 pounds. The modules, I don't know if you guys know what conduit looks like, just for those that don't know. They come in, they're 10-foot sticks, and they're straight, and it's a galvanized metal, and they're bent by using like it's called a cold bend, but it's actually on a shoe. So it's just basically like It's this other piece of metal that you bend it in that's curved. And it's all done by hand, so. So they're attached together with either galvanized or zinc hardware. And additionally, like each one of these bare conduit pieces that you'll see, each one is one continuous loop. So even though, I mean, they are like made up of like 10-foot intervals, right? It's actually one continuous line that intersects itself, and there are no ends. This piece is called Turn. It's from 2016. It measures 46 by 30 by 26. So each one of these sculptures, the bare conduit pieces, they were designed in real time with no pre-planning, no foresight. I made no drawings. It was just, I would just make a series of individual decisions and then react to the object and, try to, listen to the piece and, figure out like what shape it really wanted to be. And I really do find this to be the purest form of art making, like as a practitioner, that's accessible to me. So I really began to gravitate towards this material more, and a lot of that was because of my level of discomfort with using it, like I said before. But at the same time, I really understood that, like, where I was at in my career, I needed to make changes, and I needed to, evolve. This piece is called Ring, W-R-I-N-G. It measures 31 by 37 by 26. It's from 2016. So the piece that you see before you now is yet another step away from early work. This piece is powder coated, and it employs more materials and objects that are found in the electrical industry, such as couplings, connectors, threaded rod, junction boxes, and straps. They all converge upon one another to form this representation of a non-functioning infrastructure, which is actually occurring quite often. So watching the progression of the work, you can see a linear, gradual progression from almost these atmospheric, organic installations comprised of lightweight materials to this very blunt form that is grounded in objecthood. This piece is called Coupling, Dissect, Converge, Divorce. It's metallic tubing, various galvanized hardware. It's from 2015 to 2016. So just to give you some background on this piece, this is actually like probably the fourth or fifth iteration of this actual work. It was actually a different sculpture, and then I didn't like it, and I documented it, of course, but I didn't like it, so I cut it up, and I put it together in a different formation, and then painted it, and then we burned all that paint off, and then we painted it again for this show. So it's just like this evolving process, and it's gotten really expensive. But I'm really happy with the results. Okay, so this piece is downstairs. It's titled Vibrate, Fold, Dilate. It's from 2017. And it's just, same materials, conduit, electrical boxes, rod, threaded rod. This piece is called Echo, Scatter, Swell. I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle Segre, and I'd like to thank Bruce and the Nerman Museum for inviting me out here and putting me in the show, and everyone who's helped with the installation. Thank you so much. I'm going to show you some work starting from the piece that's downstairs called Self-Reflexive Narcissistic Supernova. It's from 2013, so I'm going to start with that and then show you work that was made since then. So most recently, things that are going into an upcoming show that's happening next month in New York. So just to give you a little bit of history, before I was working with the yarn and the wire and some of these other elements that you see here, I actually had a history of making large realistic objects out of beeswax over armatures that were made of paper mache and metal and other materials. But they were very realistic, and they were enlargements of things from the world around us. So one of those things included a whole series of giant mushrooms that were made of beeswax. And some years ago, like around 2009, I had kind of a big breakthrough, not a breakthrough, but a big change in my work, where I decided I couldn't work with beeswax anymore. So after working with it for decades, I'd kind of come to a wall with the material. And so I had to kind of train myself to think differently about how I was going to make work. So the only way I could really break from the material was to just completely cut it out of my life. It sounds like I'm talking about something else, actually, like another kind of addiction. But yeah, it was probably a little bit like that. So I started this process by using only the materials that had been in the armatures of the beeswax pieces. So the paper mache and the metal and the wires and all those other kinds of things. I started working with those, and I would try to accept them as finished pieces. And it took quite a long time. It was months and months of my rejecting most of what I was making. But eventually, I started to feel like I was developing new relationships with these other materials and no longer had to encase everything in the beeswax. So that kind of opened up a world of ideas for me, and suddenly everything became possible as an element that could be used in the making of this work. So one of the things I also started doing is recycling some of the older pieces. So this piece that you see here is the mushroom part is the bottom of the mushroom, or rather the top of the mushroom is what you're seeing facing you. And then in the next slide you see this is the underside of the mushroom. So that piece, the mushroom piece, is from 2002, and it was I did a whole series of these pieces, and I began to work in a very kind of much more improv. Is that me doing that? Sorry, it's like I'm hitting the microphone with a bat. Okay. That's great. Sorry about that. So I work, the way that my process is to create fragments of things And so I have lots of different fragments going on in my studio at any given time. And then I start, and it's a very improvisational process. I play around with putting things together and taking things away and experimenting with different variations of things. And then as I do that, a kind of, almost like a kind of narrative begins to form around the work. So I may not start out knowing what the piece is about or what the meaning of the piece is when I start, but then eventually it's, as the work progresses, I feel like I start to kind of analyze and bring in other, all kinds of thoughts about it. But one of the aims really has been from that point on to kind of to make work that doesn't satisfy a feeling of total balance, but that plays around with the idea of things being on a kind of edge where they could possibly just fall apart and not work as an art object. So I kind of like to play with this sense of the off-kilter, the off-balance, where the unexpected is what I'm kind of after with this work. So with this piece, I had made this giant amoeba shape and started weaving all kinds of objects, pieces of yarn and acrylic and all kinds of things. And I had this mushroom piece that I had wanted to repurpose in some way. And so tying the two ends together with the threads was the first way that they became connected. And then the dried mushrooms came after that. So I had already worked with dried mushrooms as a material, and it kind of made sense that the giant beeswax imitation of a mushroom would somehow interact with the real mushrooms, almost like it's sending them out into space, like into a kind of cosmos space. And I had this idea prior to seeing this old Star Trek episode called The Immunity Syndrome. I don't know if anyone's ever seen that old episode about an enormous amoeba that's like 20 miles diameter in space. And so when I was kind of re-watching all these Star Trek episodes with my young son, and when that one came on, I was like, yes, of course, the giant amoeba. That's why I'm making a giant amoeba in my studio. So it kind of took on like this kind of cosmic proportion just as an idea. Next piece I want to show you is called Spaghetti Love, and that's from around the same time as the mushroom piece. And it's an installation of drawings that came from these moleskin books. They're small books about 3 by 5 inches that I use as journals. And I use the books for note-taking and writing down titles of work and songs and doctor appointment dates, and then also for sketching out just ideas of sculptures, mostly things that I never make. And then I had wanted to do a book of these moleskin drawings, and I had tacked up Xeroxes onto a wall, and I started to see the whole thing as a kind of installation that kind of took over as an idea, and I didn't do the book in the end. And so the wall also contains not just drawings from the books. Some of them are Xeroxes, some of them are drawings that I would pull out of the book. And also all the kinds of references and photos that I have accumulated over the years from various books, nature books. I have like the whole Time Life series, which was a great series from the 60s, I believe. So a lot of the images are from that, and it's kind of about the kinds of just associations that I make in my work. A lot of the work has connections to natural forms, organic forms, so fractals, networks of lines that pertain to anywhere from electrical currents to skin cells. So a lot of the photographs in this wall installation are references that I just have around, and so I wanted to see them all in one place. Actually, the title "Spaghetti Love" comes from one of the drawings, which was like a hangman game that I had played with somebody, and wrote out the word spaghetti for one of the hangman, and the other one was love. So it ended up being the title because it was in the book. So the books themselves are from a span of about 7 years or so. And I'm bringing them up because I feel like they're very connected to the sculptures, because in the sculptures, the wire and the yarn has become a kind of way to draw for me. And so when I create these networks, I'm not really thinking about weaving. I'm actually thinking more about drawing and the kind of energy that happens with lines in space. This piece here is called Powers of Tenuous, which is after a film by the Eames, the couple, Ray, what was the other? Charles, thank you. Charles Eames made a film called Powers of 10, which some of you probably know. It's about scale. So the cube is divided into 10 squares for each side of the cube. So it's 10 by 10 by 10. So as you may have noticed, I like to work with materials that are often not terribly long-lasting. In this piece, there are pieces of bread, sliced bread. All the objects that you see floating are actually parts of loaves of bread and slices of bread that have been dried and then sealed with a particular kind of paint that has a vinyl polymer in it. It's called porous, and it's kind of a play on the idea of porous space. So the woven part is kind of like almost like a section of space that you look through the pores of, and then the bread as an object is full of pores that are created through the baking process. And then the sponges that are ensnared, actually there's one sponge ensnared in there, also have this same kind of relationship to the porous space. So and then the foam that the cactus thing sits on is also equally. So I don't know exactly why I was thinking about this this particular thing, but somehow all these elements came together for me and were connected for that reason of porousness. And one of the things that I really strive for when I'm making a sculpture is I'm thinking a lot about the presence of the piece and the way sculpture, and actually a lot of different art things have a way of being almost like transmitters or receivers in front of the viewer. So I want my work to be able to kind of push into the space around it and to have a kind of energy that exchanges with the viewer. And sometimes they really do feel like literally like they're speakers, like transmitting, because of the linear things that start to happen that emanate out from one center. You can see that in the piece downstairs a lot. In a couple of the pieces, there's one downstairs called God's Eye that has that kind of mandala type feel to it. This piece kind of is going the opposite of what I just described. It's called Colony Collapse, and it's more about like the collapse of networks, and the yarn again is being used as a linear drawing element, but it started out as like a much more kind of stretched out globe. But then, you know, the way that I work, like if things look too perfect, I'm gonna probably wanna like mess them up somehow. So in the end, I ended up crushing the whole thing and hanging it on the wall instead of allowing it to stretch. Around 2015, I embarked on a whole series of pieces using the bread, again, as a material, and I call them drift loaves, after, you know, driftwood. So they're all kind of cut into, and with these works, they are almost like miniature speakers or radios. They almost always have a hole of some kind, so they are beginning to, you know, so to feel like portraits of sorts. This one is an entire loaf. When I was making these bread pieces, I started to become more aware of ancient loaves of bread that are scattered all over the world. I was in the Metropolitan Museum and noticed that they actually had pieces of bread that were found in a tomb 3,000 years ago, and they were still like, you know, recognizable as bread. So I looked it up, and many museums actually have in their collections, of especially the Egyptian wings. In the British Museum, there's an entire loaf that's still intact. I mean, I think they were kept in very dry conditions for a very long time. So I don't know how they would fare if they were brought to New York City and into my neighborhood, for example. But so I kind of think of these works as ephemeral, but on the other hand, I'm also kind of thinking like maybe they'll outlast me, at least, you know. So I feel like we don't really know what's happening these days. So I've also just have this kind of need to see what a material is going to look like as an object, and, you know, as part of a sculpture, and the last thing I want to be worried about is if it's everlasting. So I'm more interested in what the material looks like now in the present than in the future. Like for me, it's like the ultimate deterioration of the work is part of the work. So it's kind of built into the life of the work. So these are bread totems, and they're loaves of bread that are stacked on top of each other. At first I dry them out and then stack them onto the pedestals. which are found objects for the most part, though the one on the right is plaster. The base is plaster. This is a piece called Red Desert. It's about 9 feet tall, and it's also playing with this idea of sections of space, and the idea of the transmitter. This one is called Foot of a Grimy, from around 2016, I guess, and the one previous was also 2016. Now I'm just going to show you quickly some, because I think I'm going over time here. I'm going to show you some work that's in my studio right now that's going out into the world in a month or so. So the photos are a little rough. But this one contains a hubcap, and the piece of mylar is reflecting, it hangs from the pipe. This is still untitled, but also has dried mushrooms in it, like some of the previous works. And another blue mushroom in that one. And this piece, which I did come up with a title for, is called Dawn of the Looney Tune. And so this has carrots in it. That's a new material for me, but not a new subject, because back in the days of the beeswax pieces that I told you about, I made a giant carrot, a 10-foot long carrot. So it kind of, like, I'd like to have this kind of circularity with going back to the subject matter. That's a close-up of the carrots. So this piece actually requires that it be fed carrots, because the carrots start to shrink and shrivel. They don't get moldy, they just dry and they blacken and become smaller and smaller and smaller until they're almost disappeared. So I just keep adding more carrots. So there's always fresh carrots in there. And this is another one that I'm going to show next month that's got some sponges hanging out there. And lastly is something I started experimenting with this summer, is to actually let the mold grow on the bread. So this is a loaf that's inside of an aquarium, terrarium kind of thing. It's all sealed up in there. And over the course of the summer, I watched the mold change all these different colors. And so that's it. Thank you.
Okay, hi. I'm Susan White, and first of all, I just would like to say I'm thrilled to be here, and Bruce, thank you so much. It's just really a delight. I'm excited to be part of this exhibition with these other wonderful artists. I'm thrilled to be sharing a gallery with Rena, which is really a delight, and I'm just happy to be here and talking with you, so hello. Okay, let's see if I can... there we go. Okay, I work primarily with thorns from the honey locust tree, and some of you may be familiar with this tree. It grows in kind of the central part of North America, and in Kansas and Missouri particularly. Most people who are familiar with it really hate it, because these thorns, it's a very old tree. It goes back to prehistoric times, and in fact, the thorns grow up along the trunk of the tree, and they are early on in the research I've seen and looked at, they were to to protect against the megafauna, and those are the woolly mammoths and mastodons. So, you know, over time, things have evolved, but the trees still have these thorns along the trunk. And it's a honey locust, and there are varieties that are in Kansas City and in the city, and those do not have most of them don't have the thorns. But if you're a rancher or a farmer, or you have country, you know, land in the country, and you have this tree, the thorns will go through feet and tires and shoes, and they can be as long as 12 to 15, 18 inches long. So they are my prime material. I brought a couple with me, and I know you can't see these very well, but one of the things I find so interesting about them is that they're really elegant. I find them to be really elegant, and they also have a degree of darkness and danger, and I kind of like that. I think they have a really beautiful shape. Each one is unique, of course, and they're very strong, and I find them a metaphor for a number of things, number of cultural things, and then also various elements in life. Okay, so those are the honey locust thorns. This is my tool bench. These are all burning tools, and I work with, in addition to working with thorns, I make drawings that I call pyrographs because they're burn drawings, so they're works on paper, and those are I jokingly call it a tool bench because it doesn't look very official, but those are all burning tools. And the small one, you can see the little pointed tool. That's the pencil point tip of a wood burning tool. And I use that tip to burn a hole in the thorns. And so the thorns are self-doweled as I work with them by having this burned hole. It's how they go together. I make discrete sculptures. This is about 22 inches tall. And one of the things I do is I make discrete sculptures. This is, as I said, about 22 inches tall. And this is made with natural thorns. You can see that the natural ones have kind of a mahogany color, and their consistency is sort of like fingernails. They have a kind of tough core. But these forms that I make that are discrete sculptures often have a sense of they have kind of an architectural framework about them. I also use, these thorns have lichen on them. And so as the thorns get really old, the lichen, it's a symbiotic relationship. They're not parasites. And I still use these thorns, and I make sculptures. And if they are protected and kept inside away from wind and water, they will last quite a long time. And I really think the lichen colors are particularly beautiful. I really enjoy the color and the way that they go. I also have been casting them in bronze. When I cast this bronze, and I make bronze sculptures in that regard, when I do that, it's not as if I make the sculpture and then cast it in bronze. It's that I cast each individual thorn in bronze. And so there are organic burnouts. It's an organic burnout. So each thorn has its own individual integrity. And then I use a drill press. I actually have an antique drill press. And I use an old drill press to make a hole and kind of self-dowel them together in a similar way, and then they're kind of spot welded. Okay. I also make these installations, and this is similar to what's downstairs. This is a piece that was at the Dahm Museum, and the way I do these is that I make sections of thorns, and then as I install them on the wall, they wind up interlocking, and so I have sort of an interlocking drawing that goes across, and then shadow is a part of those, as it is in the piece downstairs. And one of the things I find interesting about this work is that I think of these as drawings, actually. I think of them as sort of three-dimensional drawings. And this piece is called Floating Between the Real and the Ideal. And the idea is, when you have, in the ideal, everything is, not everything, but whether it's a relationship or a work environment or any element in terms of life, the ideal often has sort of a hazy, charismatic lure, right? That it's going to be a really lovely event that's going to happen, or a great relationship that's going to work out, or the way things are going to be, it's going to be a good deal. And then as you get closer, there's really the hard work. I mean, things are more difficult, they're a little bit more complicated, they're more complex, and I see that sort of as a metaphor for working in this way. One of the things I enjoyed about this particular piece was that it was described to me as a pencil drawing, as an eraser drawing, which I really liked because the shadow had a way of kind of smushing the color since it was all white, and I sort of enjoyed that in terms of an eraser drawing. All right. This is the second in a series of flags. I've made 3 American flags. And the American flags, this was a piece that was installed at Haw Contemporary a couple of years ago. And the idea was it had to do with the tenuous nature and the fragility and kind of the fraying of what was going on, and maybe still is going on in a way in terms of our political system and democracy and things that are going on in our country. So the thorn felt like a really important tool to use, a media to use to kind of describe that sense. This is a detail of that piece. And you can see some of the density and complexity of it. This is a piece in my studio currently, and it's kind of a work in progress. It's tentatively called USA Today, and it's has to do with the polarization, the fractious nature and the contentious nature of everything that's going on in America and the world. And this piece, this is a detail of that. And in terms of this piece, I feel like you get a sense that you can only see your side of it. You know, you can't really kind of, whatever is on the other side is a little hazy there. And I also, I don't know about you all, although I think that we share this. There's so much this constancy of information about political events, social media, in the media, in social media, in the news, in TV, in the radio. There's this constant information, and it's constantly stressful and distressing, and whether it's about current political information in our country, or whether it's about refugees around the world, or whether it's about ISIS, you know, there's this constant trauma. And so I have been feeling like there is a need for some sort of respite, or some sort of transcendence, like some way to get past that kind of constant trauma that I feel, and I would expect many of you to too. So I was driving along the street, and I was in my car. It was toward the end of the day. I was downtown, and I had the sunroof open, and I became aware that there was kind of some of like a flutter of paper or something on this, you know, on the seat next to me. And I stopped at a stoplight, and I looked down, and look what was in the seat. In my cup holder was this praying mantis. Well, it was the coolest thing because I turned off the radio. Like, I stopped listening to all this stuff that was making my blood pressure just, you know, rise. And I was just like, oh my God, what are we gonna do now? And then I looked down, and here's this praying mantis, and it was like, oh, wow. And then I took a little time, and so what I did, first of all, of course, I was like terrified, thinking, oh no, what am I gonna do? But then I pulled over to the side, and I stopped, and I don't know if you've seen praying manti, but they do this wonderful thing with their head where they kind of look at you. And so he kind of looked at me, you know, and it was just such a great moment in life and in nature and in the world. So I was able to stop, pull over. I had a piece of paper, and I was able to get him out of my car and put him into a safe space. So that was really great. Then this is a picture of the window outside my kitchen. And this is a spider web, and I think it's called a hammock spider, maybe. And so this spider we sort of let it be there for a while because it's made this great web. And it's so interesting because you can go and see, and it catches flies, and it catches little mayflies, and there are all these little leaves. And I've even seen these tiny little dots that I know are baby spiders because we had baby spiders in the basement. And I went down with my camera and I took these photos and then I enlarged them and I could see that all these tiny little dots were baby spiders. So I know that there are baby spiders in there. But so here's what, and here is this, now wait, here is the spider. Do you see him next to the leaf there? He's a pretty big spider. And I'll tell you, this really does help get your mind off of politics. It really does. Okay, so just about the same week, maybe 1 or 2 nights later, I was in the kitchen. I was doing, I don't know, dishes probably, or something, and I looked over, and on the spider web, or close to the spider web, there was another praying mantis, and it was like this big, and maybe a little bigger, and it was green, and I was watching it, and it was nighttime, so I could kind of, you could kind of see it, and it was getting closer, and I'll tell you, it was like down there, it was right underneath that kind of loopy area, and I started thinking, oh gosh, I don't want this gorgeous praying mantis to get into this spider web. So I'm watching it. Of course, I'm just standing here now and anyway, so I'm watching the spider, or this praying mantis, and it gets caught. Its back leg gets hooked into the spider web. And I thought, this is just horrible. I don't want to watch the demise of this praying mantis right here. But of course, I did, right? Because you're not going to walk away. You're not going to walk away. So I did. So I watched this praying mantis, but the best news is praying manti are really strong, and it got away. And I've never seen that. I mean, I've never watched that long, but it disconnected its back leg, and it got away. And it went on up and kind of walked over up into the top of the window, and it was okay, so I could go to bed. But but the other thing is, I realized that the spider web has its own kind of topography and has its own kind of landscape in a way. And as an artist in the Midwest, and the kind of work that I'm interested in and that I do, the landscape plays a huge role. And I try to think of my work as, or sometimes, particularly the pyrographs or the burn drawings, but also with some of the thorn works, as a way of kind of taking all that noise and all that action and all the craziness that's out here and sort of distilling it into some sort of a quiet, meditative hum, some sort of a quiet place. And this is an image of the Flint Hills after they've been burned. And I would expect many of you know this, but every year in the spring, they burn the Flint Hills as a way of restoring nitrogen to the soil. And so they're this gorgeous, rich, dark brown. And then in a few weeks, these little green roots, little plants start coming up. So although this looks like a difficult landscape, it's really a place of hope. And it's really a place of growth and the future, and that sort of quiet meditation, and a kind of confidence in the process of life and in the process of how things are going. This is another image of, again, the Flint Hills that has this beautiful crater that was also part of the burn. Now, Bruce had said to me, I'm the last one, and I need to go out on a big hurrah. But what he didn't know is that I'm sort of going out on a meditation, which is not very hurrah-y. But when I think about a sort of transcendence from this frantic, frenetic presence that we have right now everywhere, and I think about art and nature as ways of finding a kind of transcendence above that. And I'm going to ask you to, you'll have to listen kind of closely. This is a very short video. It's 30 seconds, and I don't think it's terribly loud, but you can listen to it. So let's see if I can figure out how to play it. Oh, maybe there? Ooh. Yeah.
It's right there, right?
This is River of Solace, River of Hope. Thank you very much.